You are listening to Part 10 of our 20-part series, Marvelous Mints, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Gemini. I hope you had a wonderful week.
I did, indeed. Thank you.
Were you able to connect with any Skullcap?
Actually, I have used Skullcap. I used it for a headache once, and it was really nice for it.
Yeah. That's such the perfect word, nice. Skullcap is a nice herb.
It is. It's gentle.
I mean, even like bad side effects. Take too much and you'll get giddy and confused. I mean, that's kind of nice, isn't it?
It is nice.
Right. We're not saying you're going to like throw up and start twitching. You're going to woo. And somebody, was looking over my outline and said, I see you haven't included the mind-altering mints. And I said, well, you're right. I have not included real mind-altering mints, but I would consider Skullcap to be a bit mind-altering, and catnip, absolutely. Think about your cat, and what does your cat do when your cat gets all the catnip?
Oh, he becomes very excited about that.
You think his mind has been altered?
It seems like it.
Right? I mean, cats will often chase imaginary things, right?
Yes, and roll around in it and act silly. It's fun to watch.
Right. Giddy and confused, I think we would have to say. Definitely giddy and confused there.
Yes.
So catnip, like Skullcap, is a wild plant throughout most of the northeast part of North America. And its range actually extends a little further than the range of Skullcap because it's not as fussy. I have found catnip growing basically in half an inch of soil in bare rocks. I have found catnip growing in the gardens, nice rich soil. I'd be so happy here. I have found that catnip growing in the back of what we call the perennial border, those foundation plantings around the house. And catnip says, there's room for me between these two shrubs. I'm sure I can make it, and just tucks herself in there. So catnip does prefer a full sun location. The more sun she can have, the happier she is. Unlike the Skullcap, which we said wants not to have full sun and likes to have more of that dappled light. Now, the catnip is going to be right out in the bright, bright, bright areas. And this also has something to do with the fact that catnip has a lot of volatile oil. As you're saying, the cats can find the catnip because they can smell it. As a matter of fact, there's an old rhyme about growing catnip, and it says, if you set it, the cats will get it. If you sow it, the cats won't know it. So what are we being told here? If you start catnip seed inside and get little catnip plants and put them out, you are inevitably, through your handling of them, going to release that fragrant catnip smell. And every cat for miles around will go, catnip party, and come running and crush your little baby plants. If, however, you sow the catnip seed directly into the ground, the plant will grow undisturbed. I have seen cats actually walk by huge bushes of catnip because nobody has brushed past it. It hasn't been in a situation where any of that odor has been released. And we think about this, we think, these plants are so aromatic. But it's not that they're aromatic and they just emit scent. You actually have to jostle them or rub them or touch them to release those volatile oils. Now, once you do release that, the cats are just thrilled with it. And your cat, you said when your cat gets hold of catnip, runs around and chases things, yes?
Yes, absolutely.
And then after running around and chasing things?
He tends to relax.
Indeed. So catnip, we can see, especially when it comes to cats, first excites and then relaxes. So when we are talking about sedatives, we must always keep in the back of our mind that sedatives and stimulants are not really that different. And that the mechanisms by which we experience those things are not that finely tuned. It's rather like, have you ever put your hand or your foot into water so cold that you thought it was burning hot? Because at that extreme, you really can't quite tell the difference. It's hard for your body to tell the difference between really being stimulated and really being sedated. And in fact, like we think of valerian as an herbal sedative, a third of all people who take valerian will be kept up all night by it. It actually acts as a stimulant for a great number of people. But more usually, what we have is, especially in the mint family, something that might stimulate or tonify the functioning of one part of the body, but sedate or slow and calm down other functioning of the human body. Catnip is a little bit different in that we see the effects almost one after the other in cats. First the stimulus and then the sedation. And following along with what we were saying about Skullcap, and Skullcap being used for a variety of mental health issues, including things that are just, in our minds perhaps, things that are biochemical and things that are electrical, the whole range of things. We also find that catnip has been used for that range of things, but with a particular modern twist. And that is that stimulating and sedating effect of the catnip is just what we want to give to children who are hyperactive. Now, what drug is given to hyperactive children? Many people are astonished to discover that the drug given to hyperactive children is a stimulant. And you would think, wait, aren't you saying that they're like too crazy anyhow and they won't sit still and you're giving them a stimulant? Well, yeah, we can't totally explain what happens, but somehow when you're a bit overstimulated, giving you a stimulant actually calms you down. And this is what I'm talking about, right? But there's the yin and the yang of it. And you push it past a certain point, it almost becomes the other thing. So catnip tincture has been used by parents with boys, or often boys, much more so than girls, who have been diagnosed with attention deficient disorder or hyperactivity attention deficient disorder. And the parents tell me that catnip tincture has made a better change in their son's life than the drugs. A few parents are telling me that they have actually even gotten the public school system to agree to give their children catnip tincture rather than the drug, because the teachers can obviously see that their behavior is where they want it to be. And, if you need to say that you have a religious objection to using drugs, you can certainly do that if you're not going to use any other drugs. Or you can just say, no, in this instance, I really want my child to be given this. And, of course, do take it in a labeled bottle, not some homemade things. If they don't have an opportunity to raise their eyebrows or question it. One mom said to me, that Skullcap, that worked so great for my hyperactive son. It was like, I thought I just could not live without Skullcap. And she said, then, we were taking a plane ride from New York to California. And I thought, if my son is running up and down the aisles and screaming at the top of his lungs for a 6-hour plane flight, I probably won't survive it because the other passengers will destroy me. before we ever get to California. So she decided that she would give him twice his usual dose of catnip tincture. Well, unfortunately, it acted on him just like it did on the cat, and he did indeed run up and down the aisle screaming until they were about an hour from California, in which he fell into a deep and profound sleep, which he did not wake up from for 6 hours. And she said, so if I ever do that again, we're going to do it well before the plane flight so that he gets that part out, and then I want the deep and profound sleep for the plane flight. Catnip, as it is usually used, is not going to cause that much sleep, but as a tincture of the flowering top of the catnip, it can. One of my first apprentices allied very, very deeply with catnip. Catnip was like her plant. And she had simple menstrual cramps. And every month her period would come on, her cramps would come on. She'd go outside, she'd harvest some catnip, she'd put it in a cup. She'd pour boiling water over it. She'd stir some honey into it. She'd drink it, and she'd go, no more cramps. How marvelous, how beneficent. And then, in the second year of her apprenticeship, she decided to go to the Michigan Women's Music Festival. And she kind of looked at her calendar and counted the days, and she said, oh, no. She said, I'm going to start bleeding while I'm there. And this is going to be awful because I'm going to have cramps, and there's not going to be any catnip. What am I going to do? So she decided to do a few experiments. And one of her experiments was to tincture some catnip. And there was some catnip with flowers. She tinctured the flowering top of the catnip. And she took a dropper full of it, and she said to me, it was like running as fast as you can possibly run into a brick wall. She said that catnip tincture, she took it, and a couple of hours later she came to. So, of course, it was a very large dose, right, a dropper full dose, and she'd made it from the fresh catnip, and she had a very strong association with the plant. I have not found a lot of people telling me, oh, yeah, catnip, it really makes me go to sleep, but for this woman, catnip was, she said, boy, if I ever need to go to sleep, a big dose of catnip, and that will definitely do it. So she didn't think she was going to be using catnip when she was at this music festival where she didn't really want to sleep at all. So she tried drying some catnip and rolling it up in cigarette papers and making catnip cigarettes. And the next time she got her period, she took out her catnip cigarette and she lit it up and she started smoking that catnip cigarette. And about halfway through, she looked at me and she winked and she said, cramps, God. And so in preparation to going off to this big women's music festival, she dried enough catnip and rolled up 100 catnip cigarettes. And when she got to the music festival, she volunteered to work a shift in the healing tent. And the first 90-some-odd women who came to the healing tent who had menstrual cramps were given a catnip cigarette to smoke. And she said at least 90% of them, like herself, felt relief from their simple menstrual cramps before the catnip cigarette was half smoked. And they were all very pleased that she had found such an easy remedy. However, warning here, it smells more like ganja than ganja does. The stuff, you're not going to smoke it discreetly. Let me put it that way. And you're going to be leaving a plume of really strong smoke behind you. So we do suggest, if you're going to be smoking catnip, to take care of menstrual cramps or any other kind of cramping. Do smoke it outside. Catnip has actually been used as a seasoning herb in cooking, the leaves and the shoots, in sauces, soups, and stews. And it was one of the most popular drinks in medieval Europe. Catnip was introduced into North America. It now, as I said, grows wild here. But very soon after it was introduced, the Native Americans adopted it, and they said, ooh, yeah, catnip, that's the cat's pajamas. All right. In general, herbalists think of catnip as a relaxing, multi-purpose tonic. It was indeed one of the main healing herbs grown by monks in their monastery gardens, and they thought of catnip first when anyone was coughing. They said, yeah, just get some catnip, and you boil that down, just throw it in there, boil it down, decoct it, add a bunch of honey, and wham, that is going to so relieve your cough. Catnip was also, the fresh leaves were used as a poultice for dealing with bruises, skin lesions, cuts, blisters, and irritation on the scalp. After catnip became a vigorous wild plant here, the Cherokee adapted it, and they used it in just about any way you could use a mint. The Chippewa, the Delaware, the Ontario, the Iroquois all thought that catnip was indeed the cat's pajamas, and not just for adults but for children. Catnip is and always has been a children's remedy, whether it is treating childhood diarrhea, childhood stomach aches, childhood sore throats, teething, restlessness, colic, right? All of the little minor things that happen to kids, catnip tea is there to help. Now, let me make a big distinction here for you. In general, we're not using Skullcap as a tea. But that doctor I talked about with the young man who took a head first off a bridge and missed the water and hit the land, they used Skullcap teas because that was the only way that I knew to use it at that point. And he had wonderful results from that. I'm not going to tell you that he came back to full mental functioning, that he improved a lot more than most of the medical professions thought it was possible for him to improve. So Skullcap we're using almost exclusively as a tincture from the fresh flowering plant. All right, so we're going to use fresh flowering Skullcap to make our tincture. And catnip, if we wanted to make a tincture, we do the same thing. We use the fresh flowering catnip, but most of the time we're going to be using the leaves and stalks of catnip to make tea. Catnip tea is really tasty, and it can be used either fresh or dried. I mentioned last week when we just started talking about these 4 wonderful, relaxing herbs that one of the difficulties with catnip is that it loses its volatile oils in drying so very easily. It's said that if you heat dry catnip, in other words, if you put it in a dehydrator or someplace where there's a heat to dry it, that will lose 80% of its volatile oil during the drying process. And that if you air dry it by hanging it at ordinary room temperature to dry, it will still lose up to 30% of the volatile oils. Yes, you're sitting there going, all right, I hear Susan and Gemini talking about cats and catnip. But the truth of the matter is, every time I give my cat catnip, my cat looks at it like, what is this, a dog bone? And the problem there is you've got an old, dried catnip, and there's no volatile oils left there. Yes, I've even had people say, yeah, well, it said it had catnip in it, but my cat didn't think it had catnip in it. I'm like, yeah, well, it did have catnip in it. It's just old catnip. You give a cat some fresh catnip or some freshly dried catnip and sit back. Be sure you have a nice beverage and some popcorn at hand, because you are definitely going to see the catnip show with your cat. Catnip has been used to treat toothache, sore breasts, tonsillitis. You remember when we talked about sage back up in the very, very early shows, that was our fourth show, and I said that sage is one of the best herbs to stop sweating. Well, catnip is its opposite. Catnip is one of the mints that is one of the most powerful to stimulate sweating. And you're thinking, why do I want to sweat? Well, of course, if you have a fever, it is often considered really excellent medicine to sweat that fever out. Catnip has been used to help people dealing with arthritis, rheumatism, hemorrhoids, eye inflammation, allergies. So a huge number of different things. And I found it very fascinating that lions, tigers, leopards, and jaguars also respond to catnip, and that their trainers sometimes use it to help train even the big cat. And there is something called a catnip response. All right, sniffing, licking, escalating to head shaking, chin rubbing, full body rubbing, and ultimately enthusiastic carousing. As I said, plants in the mint family do have some mild psychoactive effects as well. Catnip oil has been shown to depress the central nervous system in humans, and laboratory experiments conducted at Iowa State University have found that the volatile compounds in catnip are highly effective mosquito repellents, in fact, as good as high concentrations of DEET. Both yarrow and catnip have been found to be extremely effective insect repellents. I tend to use yarrow tincture because I think of it as more broad spectrum. But if I was in a place where there were a lot of black flies and mosquitoes, I might also bring some catnip tincture along with me because it is thought to be more specific than the yarrow in terms of mosquitoes. I was also rather fascinated to discover that not all domestic cats respond to catnip. So it may not be that you got to bombard your cat if they're old catnip. It may just be that your cat doesn't really get it. The catnip response, which we were talking about, is an inherited trait that is carried on a dominant gene in the cat. And so we're going to have some cats with recessive, and they, like the people who don't like the taste of cilantro, just don't get what all the fuss about catnip is. Remember that since this is an herb that is volatile, we want to protect it. The root of catnip, when chewed, is said to make the most gentle person fierce and quarrelsome. And there's a legend that a certain hangman who could never screw up his courage to the point of hanging anyone used catnip so that he could complete his job. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Rats dislike catnip root particularly and will run away from any place where catnip root is put out. It is said that if you don't have catnip, that ground ivy can be used instead to repel mice and rats. All right. When you make your catnip tea, be sure to put the saucer on your cup. We want to keep those volatile oils inside. And the medieval herbalists of Europe went one better on my apprentice who found it so relieving of her cramps. They would take the fresh catnip and they would express the juice of it. And they usually did that by grinding and pounding the catnip and putting it in a cloth and then twisting and wringing the cloth until the green juice came out of it. And that was taken in tablespoon full doses as an amenagogue. A gog means to flow easily. And amena sounds like menses, and it is. So we have silalagogues, which make the saliva flow easily. We have cholagogues, which make the bile flow easily. And we have galactagogues, which make the milk flow easily, and amenagogues, which make menstruation flow easily. Now, for hundreds and hundreds of years, especially in the European tradition, the word amenagogue has also been code for an herb that can bring on a period when you are pregnant. In other words, an herb that can actually function as an abortifacient. Catnip has been fingered as one such herb. In general, the ways that catnip is currently used as catnip tea or even as catnip tincture has not proved successful in being an amenagogue, but it is certainly possible that if taken the way it's recommended in the older herbals by expressing the juice and then taking that in tablespoonful doses. I also found it quite interesting that a very old herbal said that the young tops of catnip should be cooked with sweetener until we have made a catnip jam, and that, a spoonful of that, taken before bed, will stop the nightmares of children. I bet it would taste good, too. Don't you think so? One more modern author said, catnip is for anybody who has a hot head, anybody who flies off the handle, anybody who has a red tongue, anybody whose pulse is hard and rapid. This is your person that you would say, get thee to the Skullcap, and let's see if we can cool you off a little bit. Now, if you think about the Skullcap and the catnip, remember that the catnip grows in the hotter situations. So I might first offer that hot-headed person just a tiny little bit of Skullcap and see if they respond to that. And if they don't, well, you know, catnip is a wonderful, wonderful plant to have around. Catnip is considered both cooling and drying, even though it does grow in the bright sunlight. And we see that catnip is contraindicated during pregnancy, and that many plants in the mint family are contraindicated during pregnancy. Again, the way that these plants are used, it's just really not possible that it's going to disturb the pregnancy in any way at all. But I also find that people are being told, oh, with this condition you can't have mint, and I think it was some digestive thing. And, of course, to the herbalist, this is just craziness because, of course, mint is so helpful in all kinds of digestive issues. But she was saying, oh, no, I can't have mint. And I asked her, well, can you have basil? And she said, yes. And I said, well, that's a mint. And rosemary, she said, yes. I said, that's a mint. And thyme and oregano, and she said, well, yes. I said, those are mints. So you're being allowed to use all these mints, and somehow you're being made paranoid about peppermint. I've met people who've been made paranoid about catnip. And I'm not saying that these plants can't be prepared in ways that could possibly cause them to be amenagogues, but I'm saying it's not very reliable. It doesn't work very well at all. So in the amounts that we are taking, I certainly do not feel that they need to be contraindicated for any woman who is pregnant, because we're not talking about her taking a highly concentrated dose of Skullcap or any of these other mints. As for the injunction that you should not take any mint at all if you're taking a homeopathic remedy, again, once you see the extent of the mints, you're going to say, I wonder if that is really reasonable or not. The Commission E in Germany says no health hazards or side effects are known in conjunction with the use of catnip, but they do say not to be used during pregnancy, and I would take that simply with a, shall we say, small grain of salt. Oh, my goodness, Gemini, here we are once again at the end of our time together.
Thank you, Susan. This concludes Part 10 of our 20-part series, Marvelous Mints, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Wade at Time Monk Radio.